All right, today we're jumping right into the technical heart of REDD+. That's the global effort to slash emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. We're going to break down exactly how countries create something called a forest reference level. It's basically the critical benchmark that makes all this climate action, well, measurable.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the what and why. What this benchmark really is and why it matters so much. Then we'll get our hands dirty with the how it's built, how all that data actually shapes a country's strategy, and finally, what that whole official UNFCCC submission process looks like.
Okay, first things first, let's nail down the terminology. You're going to hear about FRLs and FRLs a lot. That's Forest Reference Emission Levels and Forest Reference Levels. And trust me, these aren't just a bunch of fancy acronyms. They are the absolute linchpin for figuring out if a country's REDD+ efforts are actually working.
So here's the most important thing to remember. A FREL or FRL is basically a baseline. Think of it like a historical yardstick. It's the starting line that we measure everything against. All the future work to cut emissions or boost forest carbon, it's all compared back to this one benchmark to see if it made a real difference. Now, there's a small but really important difference between the two. On the one hand, you've got a FREL that's focused only on reducing emissions, think stopping deforestation, stopping degradation. But an FRL, well, that's a bit broader. It covers both reducing emissions and increasing removals. That's the plus in REDD+ we always talk about, things like planting new forests that actively suck carbon right out of the air.
And this graph, this shows you exactly how it works. See those blue dots? That's a country's historical emissions over a certain period. And that dotted line? That's the FREL, the average, the benchmark that's set from all that past data. Now, the cool part. Look at the green dots. These show what happened after the REDD+ actions kicked in. Any dot that falls below that benchmark line, bam, that's a real, measurable, verifiable drop in emissions. That's how you prove success. So you might be wondering why go through all this technical heavy lifting? Well, it really boils down to three main reasons. First, it's how a country can officially show its contribution to global climate goals. Second, it's a super useful tool for them to see if their own internal policies are actually working. And third, and this is a really big one, you need to have a technically assessed FRL to get access to international results-based payments. In other words, it's the key to unlocking crucial funding.
Okay, so how does a country actually build one of these benchmarks? Let's dive into the nuts and bolts. It's a pretty detailed process for sure, but the whole thing is designed to be flexible and to let countries get better at it over time. So building a reference level means making a whole series of key technical decisions. You've got to define the scale. Are we talking the whole country or just one region? You've got to define the scope. Which activities are we measuring? You even have to decide on your specific national definition of a forest. But the real core of it is analyzing historical data. And that has two key parts. First is activity data, which is basically the rate of forest loss, like how many hectares disappeared each year. And second is the emission factors, which is the impact of that loss. How much carbon gets released when 1 hectare of that specific type of forest gets cut down.
And you gotta understand, this isn't a one-and-done kind of deal. The whole framework is really built on this idea of learning by doing. The idea is that countries can start with the data and capacity they have right now, and then, over time, they can keep refining their methods as they get better data and more experience. It's all about continuous improvement.
This flexibility is really captured in what's called the stepwise approach. See, the ultimate goal is a full national benchmark. But as an interim step, countries can start smaller, at a subnational level, maybe focusing on just one region. This lets them build up their skills and test things out. Brazil is the perfect case study here. They started with a baseline that focused just on the Amazon, which was smart because that's where the most deforestation was happening. It let them build capacity and show results fast. From there, they gradually expanded their scope and improved their data for their official submission to the UNFCCC. And now the plan is to eventually cover all their different biomes and all their REDD+ activities.
But here's something really cool. This whole construction process, it's so much more than just a technical box-ticking exercise. The analysis itself actually gives you these incredibly powerful insights that are absolutely fundamental to creating an effective national REDD+ strategy. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is where the whole thing shifts from just looking at what happened to understanding why it happened. By digging into all that historical emissions data, a country is basically forced to figure out the real underlying causes of its forest loss. It's about finding the story behind the numbers.
And that analysis, it uncovers the drivers.
We're talking about the direct drivers, the actual stuff happening on the ground, like logging or clearing land for farms. But it also reveals the more complex, indirect drivers, things like global commodity prices, population pressure, or weak governance that are pushing those direct activities forward. You can't fix a problem if you don't know what's causing it, and this is the first step.
So at the end of the day, this deep, data-driven understanding gives you a fantastic two-for-one benefit. On one hand, it makes sure the reference level itself is solid and actually reflects what's happening, and on the other hand, it gives policymakers the hard evidence they need to design really targeted policies, the specific actions that are going to tackle those drivers and really, truly reduce deforestation.
All right, so the benchmark has been built, the strategy is informed by real data. What's next? The final step in this whole journey is to submit all this hard work to the UNFCCC for a transparent, international technical assessment.
Now, it's really important to know this isn't some kind of pass-fail exam. The whole process is designed to be helpful, not judgmental. A team of land use experts reviews the submission, they chat with the country to get clarifications, and they work together through a draft and then a final report. You should really think of it more as a collaborative technical conversation, all aimed at making the final benchmark as strong as it can possibly be.
And make no mistake, it is a thorough process. This whole back and forth, this supportive exchange to make sure the FREL is robust and totally transparent, it can take up to 42 weeks. That's from the moment a country clicks submit to the final report being published.
So, when you step back and look at the big picture, what does this all really mean? Well, each country's submission is obviously a huge piece of its own climate strategy, but when you put them all together, they're building something much bigger. A transparent, data-driven global architecture for actually monitoring and protecting the world's forests. So the question we're left with isn't just about how one country performs, but how all of this shared knowledge and transparency is going to shape and accelerate our collective action on a global scale.